Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this presentation from RUSTA in association with WEX. I'm Kev Taylor from RUSTA, Eagle Eye Innovations, and we're just going to tell you a little bit about ourselves just before we get started, and my colleague here, Peter Taylor. So a little bit about me then. I'm a recognised assessment entity instructor, both on the theory and the flight assessment side, and I'm able to do those flight instruction examinations, and I'm the head of academy here at RUSTA. At RUSTA, we've trained thousands of pilots since 2016. Myself, I've trained well in excess of 1,000, specialising mainly in the military and the police sector. The reason for this, I'm also a volunteer. I'm a special sergeant with Lincolnshire Police, and I'm the chief pilot on the Lincolnshire Police drone unit. So I've got lots of operational flying experience, as well as that commercial instruction and examination experience. I did used to be in the Royal Air Force as a radar engineer. I also fly fixed wing and rotary, so that I have my private pilot's license. I think it's really good that I can bring into this the experience I have both from manned aviation and unmanned aviation. And I've done about 1,200 hours of fixed wing and rotary flying in manned aviation.
My name's Peter Taylor. I started off quite early on being very interested in aircraft and joined the Air Cadets when I was 13. I then went off to do an aerospace engineering degree down at Bristol before joining the RAF in 2003, where I became a helicopter pilot. Started off on Merlins and then across to Cyprus on Griffin. And then finally I ended up on Reaper. So the last 3 years I've been on Reaper. I joined the company back in February, so I'm fairly new, but I've been helping out on all elements of the company, both the smaller stuff and the larger drones as well.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Peter. A little bit about RUSTA then. So we are accredited by the Civil Aviation Authority, and since 2015, first as a national qualified entity and now as a recognised assessment entity. That means that we're able to train ab initio remote pilots and give them that accreditation that they need for those flying qualifications for unmanned aircraft. And we'll go on to talk about which types of qualifications they are. You may have heard A2 CFC and GVC. We'll talk about that. We do have a lot of corporate clients. We do work very much in the military and the emergency services sector, but we do also train different sectors as well. So companies, the next slide will show you a sample of the different companies that we've worked with in the past. From the TV production and movie making point of view, we've worked with people like Game of Thrones, a lot of utility and power companies. We're working with various news companies as well. And then, as I said, we also work very heavily within that emergency services military sector. So there's a slide there with a few of our current customers that we've been training. So what we want to do is just try and give you an understanding to what is a very complex situation. We fully understand that these regulations that came into place now at the beginning, at the start of the year, really are quite complex and quite difficult for people to understand. So within the next hour, what we really hope we can do is give you that understanding and that background as to where these rules apply for you if you are currently or you are interested in moving into flying unmanned aircraft. So we'll talk first of all about the open category. The open category really is the entry level as to you flying your unmanned aircraft. And really what happened from where we used to have permission for commercial operations. And if you wanted to operate commercially, you had to go through that process of gaining that permission. The rules and regulations have changed now. So the rules are really based on risk. Everything focuses on the risk that you're going to take in order to get that job done. So we talk about the open category, and as you can see there on the screen, we're showing three categories. We're showing the open category, which is green, and that's for low risk operations. We're showing that specific category, which is the GVC, and we'll want to talk about that in a little while. And then the certified category, which is the heavier, bigger aircraft where the risk is extremely high, and that risk sort of is equivalent to the same risk that you would expect with manned aircraft. So let's talk about that open category first of all. Within the open category, there are subcategories, and this can be quite difficult for people to understand. And what I really want to do is just break it down as simply as we can. Let's start off with the A3 category. I find it's easier for people to understand if we work backwards. If you want to go out and fly your unmanned aircraft and you want to fly it far away from people, that's absolutely fine. That risk is considered to be low. You're not expected to undergo any further training, and we'll talk about the basic training that you must do, you must comply with for the Civil Aviation Authority, but you're not expected to take on any further training. So first of all, let's just talk about what we need to do. And there are a few areas where it does vary, but generally speaking, and we'll come back to where you don't have to, but generally speaking, if you have an unmanned aircraft, you would need to register that and create an operator ID. That would cost you £9 a year. And that operator ID is like a registration. The difference is, unlike a car, where a car's got a different registration for each car that you own, you would put the same operator ID on every aircraft that you own. Therefore, if it's found or if you're questioned, we know that that aircraft is registered to you, or the authorities know that aircraft is registered to you. And if it's picked up anywhere, they can get that back to you. It also gives that confidence level that you're not going to do anything that you shouldn't be doing with that aircraft. Secondly, you then have to go on to take what is called a flyer ID. And these are, if you like, these are mandated by the government. And that flyer ID is free for you to do. It's an online test and it's 40 questions. And generally speaking, that's what you have to do for any unmanned aircraft. And there is one exception to that rule, but we'll come back to that. Therefore, if you then want to go on and fly your aircraft within the different categories, within the open category, which is where your starting point would be, you can fly in that A3 category, that far from, so you can fly in the middle of a field, if you like, away from those residential, commercial, industrial and recreational areas where you're not really going to be a risk to anybody else. And you can do that without any further training. The time comes if you want to fly closer to people, and that's where we need to get into that additional training. So flying close to people or flying around people or over people is where that additional training needs to come in, and that's what we'll talk about. So there are a couple of different qualifications you can do, but if you're going to fly in the open category, then you would need that A2 CofC, that A2 Certificate of Competence, to go on and fly within that A2 category that will allow you to fly closer to people. So if you want to fly in residential, commercial, industrial or recreational areas, then you must do that A2 CofC as a minimum, if not that GVC. And that is the qualification that you will need to do. Then we move on to the A1 category where you can fly over people, and it gets a little bit more complicated because it will look at the weight of the aircraft. The one exception to this is if you fly a Mavic Mini 2, one of these very small aircraft that weighs under 250 grams, where that's considered not to be a risk. Okay, so that's the one exception to those rules, and we'll talk about the Mini 2. There's lots of benefits to the Mini 2, but there are also some restrictions that we'll talk about later. But there are other aircraft available that are less than 250 grams. It's not just the Mini 2, it's any aircraft that falls into that sub 250 gram category. And moving on then, if you want to do something where the risk is higher, you would go into what we call that specific category. And that's where you do the GVC, that General Visual Line of Sight Certificate. Okay, that's where you would apply to the Civil Aviation Authority for that operational authorization. So we'll talk about the courses that are offered, the A2 CofC course, which will allow you to fly those aircraft closer to people. But that's a really important key message you want to get across. If you want to fly in the open spaces away from residential, commercial, industrial, recreational, then you can fly in the A3. You don't need to do any further training. But in order to get this great footage that these aircraft can deliver, you're generally going to be within those congested areas. That's what we call a congested area. Okay. So there's a question about existing platforms. So the key thing with these aircraft as we move forward in the industry is that it's been decided that these will carry a rating, and that's what we call a C rating. As it stands at the moment, no aircraft carry that C rating. There are none available. No manufacturer as of today is making an aircraft with a C rating. Therefore, we are in what we call a transitional phase. So we've got all the old aircraft, the Mini, the Mavic, the Hotel, those different types of aircraft are all out there in the market, and they're flying in what we call that transitional category. So if you have one of these aircraft and you've not done any additional training, then you are limited to flying in the A3, that far from category only. So you must not fly within those recreational, commercial, industrial areas. Okay. If you want to take one of these transitional aircrafts and fly within one of those areas and fly closer to people, that's when you will need to do that A2 or that GVC qualification. So I hope that helps to kind of understand where we're coming from. And within that transitional phase, we've got the different weights that we can fly within the different categories, and we can talk about those as we go through. So what we had in advance of today is a lot of questions, and we're just going to cover those questions because we believe that a lot of those questions will cover off a lot of those for you. So I'll let Pete come on to this question. So from Susan, what are the current regulations for drones in urban and mountainous areas?
So yeah, within, in fact, sorry, you go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So when we're talking about the urban areas and the mountain areas, first of all, we've covered off the urban areas. Okay. So we need to be very, very mindful. We're not aware of any further changes coming to the regulations. So if you're out in those mountain areas, you can carry on flying within that A3 category. You don't need to do any additional qualifications. If you want to fly within a city or a town, then you're certainly going to need to do that A2 CFC, so that as a minimum. And we'll come on to talk about the A2 CFC as well. There are some questions in here that cover off what we can do within the A2 CFC. Do you want that one, Pete?
Yeah, so the Mavic Air 2 fits in that category, nice light category below 250 grams. So can you fly the Mavic Air 2?
A Mavic Air 2, more than 250 grams.
More than 250 grams, yeah. Can you fly the beach? Whereas beach is considered as a recreational area. So you have to stay,
50 meters,
50 meters
away, yeah. So it's a recreational area, so you wouldn't need that A2 CFC or that GVC. So you are going to, if you're using that A2 CFC, you're going to have to stay at least 50 meters away from people. And there are crowds and assemblies of people as well, which we can't fly over crowds and assemblies of people. So we'll need to stay away from crowds and assemblies. And we can talk about crowds and assemblies of people and what they are. Effectively, a crowd or assemblies of people is the number of people where if the aircraft were to fall, that those people wouldn't be able to move away. So there is absolutely no aircraft that you can fly over an assembly of people. So if we're talking about a football stadium with people in it, if the football stadium's empty, then there's not an assembly of people inside the football stadium. But if the football stadium is full, then that would be an assembly of people. They wouldn't be able to escape should the aircraft fall from the sky, and therefore you wouldn't be able to fly over them. So Luke, can you fly a Mavic Air 2 at the beach? Arguably, Luke, you're going to need an A2 CFC or a GVC, okay? But if the beach is extremely busy and if those people are unable to move away, then the answer is no. So like everything, this is based on risk. Sometimes there's more than one answer or there's an additional variable. So in Luke's case, his Mavic Air 2, he would need an A2 CFC or his GVC. And if there are uninvolved people on the beach, you need to stay at least 50 meters away from those uninvolved people with his A2 CFC or his GVC. However, if it's so busy that there is a large assembly or a crowd of people and they were unable to move away should the aircraft fall, then he can't fly over the beach. So I hope that answers that question. It is a complicated one. That's the reason why we picked up on that one. Okay.
I might be able to answer.
Go on, you will, Pete. You will.
Okay, so 30 steps from filming shipping, mainly cruise liners flying over water and restrictions over shipping lanes. So there's no specific restrictions over the shipping lanes. You do obviously still have to stay within visual line of sight, so you've got to stay within that 500 meters and within 120 meters of the surface. So the shots you're going to get are going to be restricted. There are also technical limitations with the aircraft as well. So over water, they don't perform well as well with the sensors. So there could be a slight descent towards the water, which you need to be aware of. And obviously you still need to stay 50 meters away from uninvolved persons as well.
Yeah, so absolutely right. And that visual line of sight is the key one. So you're talking about shipping lanes. Well, generally speaking, those shipping lanes are going to be a bit further out. So you would need to stay in line of sight of the aircraft. So it's very unlikely you'll be going beyond into those shipping lanes, I would imagine. Like we said before, and let's just clarify for anybody who's heard things from the past, some people who've trained previously are still have not quite caught up with the rules yet. And we used to talk about persons, vehicles, vessels and structures. Yeah. And we always had to be mindful of persons, vehicles, vessels and structures. The regulations now revolve around uninvolved persons and those persons being protected. So I hope that helps you to understand. So the vessel itself is not of a concern. However, there are uninvolved persons on that. There are uninvolved persons on that vessel who are not involved with you because they've not been briefed and not there for the purposes of that drone flight. So therefore, you need to be very mindful of those uninvolved persons. So with an A2 CFC, you would stay at least 50 meters away from them horizontally. And with a GVC, you could fly over them if you stayed 50 meters away. So you can have overflight with a GVC. The GVC is classed as a bubble, and we'll talk about that as we go on. I do realise it might sound really, really complicated. It is extremely complicated why these courses are there. That's why the A2 CFC is offered and the GVC is offered. And
additionally on this one as well, we talked about it's very hard to judge the distance between yourself and an obstacle as well. So there's nothing on the aircraft that tells you that. So keeping that 50 meters away, it can be tricky. So you can perhaps rely on automatics and things like that.
So you know how far the aircraft is away from you, but what you don't know is how far is the aircraft away from that ship. And how are you going to ensure you keep that minimum distance of 50 meters horizontally if you've got an A2 CFC, or 50 meters, which can be an overflight on the GVC. And that's very much, hopefully, you're seeing that without doing anything, you're going to be very restricted. If you do an A2 CFC, it's going to lift some of those restrictions and give you some benefits. And if you want the rest of the benefits, then you go on to the GVC. And there's a difference in the level of training there as well. We had a question from Anthony, a really good question. Where's the best place to find the rules for using drones in his local area?
Yeah, so it used to be called NATS Drone Assist. It's now just called Drone Assist. It's done by Altitude Angel. It's a great app which you can download. There are other apps out there as well which do this, but it gives you the FRZs around airfields, tells you if it's clear, but it also gives you notifications of other air users as well, and it's all filtered below 400 feet. Yeah,
so let's talk about that while we're on that page. So those FRZs, those flight restriction zones. So there are areas that are warnings for you, but there are a few areas for all drone pilots that you simply can't fly without permission. They're restricted areas, danger areas, and prohibited areas. There are also, since the Gatwick incident, some new laws were brought out in February 2018 to give protected aerodrome status to aerodromes, airfields. And so what you would know as an airport, Heathrow, Gatwick, your local regional airport, Bristol, Doncaster, they've got protected aerodrome status, as have your typical RAF bases, wherever your nearest RAF base is. And we're based in Lincolnshire, we've got lots of them here as well. And then those airfields that were typically known as licensed, those general aviation airfields, they also have protected aerodrome status as well. So you are not allowed with your unmanned aircraft, any unmanned aircraft, including toys, to fly within one of those areas. So flight restriction zone and runway protection zones were put around these airports, the RAF bases and those general aviation airfields to protect those aircraft that are flying from there. So you really need to use this Altitude Angel in order to be able to look at this app, look at the area you're in. It'll show you a push pin of the area, drop pin in the area that you're in, and you must stay outside those flight restriction zones and runway protection zones. And if you can see from that image there, the dark areas you can see the runways coming out from them. They have dimensions around them. They're 2 or 2.5 nautical miles from the center of the runway. And for the flight restriction zone, the runway protection zone is 5 kilometers in length by 1 kilometer wide, and they all go from the surface up to 2,000 feet. So that's to protect those aircraft, and rightly so, those manned aircraft and those people that are flying on those manned aircraft. You must stay out of those. It's an offence. It's a criminal offence to fly within those. So be really careful on those. It'll also give you the other warning areas as well, warning you where there are issues, but it doesn't stop you flying in those areas, but it might be warning you such of increased activity or the potential for areas of conservation and things like that. So national trust, those types of areas can often be identified with a warning telling you what they are. Although if you're using the airspace, it doesn't necessarily restrict you in the airspace. So you're just going to have to work out. And then again, if you come on one of the A2 CFC or the GVC courses, these will all be explained. some people maybe sat there feeling now this is, really confusing, and that's why we run the courses.
Additionally on this as well, it can change quite quickly. So things like a NOTAM can drop onto those maps. Things are pre-planned. So like the red arrows this time of year, they're around the country. Those red splodges will then get bigger and restrict the airspace even further. So it's something that you want to pre-plan before you go flying. You want to check the weather, but also when you on the day of flying and just before you go flying, you just need to make sure there's nothing new where you're operating.
Absolutely right. We just had a question in from Sunny. We've got a load of questions that come in previously, but we're also taking questions as we go through. So if you have, please do submit your questions. Sunny is flying a DJI Spark. So he's got his Spark. So really, Sunny, the only place you can really fly with that Spark is in that A3, that area that far from people, and you must stay 150 meters away from the residential, commercial, and industrial areas. Okay, so unless you do that A2 CofC, which is going to allow you to fly within those areas, because you've been deemed to do that extra training, which will take you on and allow you to do that.
With the Spark, I used to have a Spark, and then that crashed into a tree because the battery fell off the bottom and then fell from height. So I'd always advocate a good check of those battery clips with the Spark. It's now in pieces.
Bless you. Jeffrey says, do you need a qualification before flying a drone? So Jeffrey, no, the qualification that you need really is going to be to ensure that you've registered your operator ID and you've gone online, done the 40 questions, and you've got a flyer ID. There is only one exception to the flyer ID. It complicates things. The exception is that sub 250 gram aircraft. However, I would advocate everybody should do that anyway. It's 40 questions, and those questions are the type of questions that are going to help you understand those areas you should stay away from and how you're going to operate safely. So let's not, just because we don't have to do it, let's not avoid it. It's 40 questions. It's going to keep you safe. It's potentially going to stop you going into one of those flight restriction zones, those runway protection zones, and so on. It's also going to help you understand those danger areas and prohibited areas. Just bear in mind that in law is classed as an aircraft. Yes, it's an unmanned aircraft, but it's still classed as an aircraft, albeit unmanned. You are actually classed as a pilot, albeit a remote pilot, but in law you're classed as a pilot. So you come under the same jurisdiction and regulations that manned aviation and manned pilots come under. So do you need any qualifications? Well, you certainly need that operator ID. You need the flyer ID. And then if you just want to fly in those very open areas in that A3 category, you're absolutely fine with that. And that will allow you to fly your unmanned aircraft up to 25 kilos. However, if you want to fly something closer to those congested recreational areas, commercial, industrial, we've spoke about, then you will need to do an A2 CofC or a GVC qualification. Carl's asking, there, one for you, Pete.
Yeah,
there's no good answer to this one.
There's no good answer to this one. No, it's been debated for a long time. They're still trying to work on it, I believe, the regulations. But at the moment, we don't think there's going to be any retrospective rights given to these aircraft. Certainly, the older ones, it's very unlikely they're going to get any C stamp on them. So yeah, any drone bought now, yeah, it's debatable.
Yeah, it's debatable. The latest one, I suppose, from one manufacturer is the Mavic Air 2S. Yeah. It would appear on paper that it could meet those regulations generally. Yeah. However, whether DJI are retrospectively going to certify it to that C rating. So just to clarify on the ratings, it's a little bit of an issue around Europe as well, because obviously with Brexit, so we won't be using that CE marking, and we'll be using what we call a C rating in the UK. So we've got to be, it's generally the same. It mirrors exactly a CE marking, but in legal terms, it's not actually the CE marking. So I think there's still a lot of unknown questions at the moment in regards to that.
Brexit and COVID have just delayed the process. We were hoping to have been answered by now.
Absolutely. Luke, what do you need to fly commercially? Great question. If you'd have asked me this question this time last year, I would have said you need a permission for commercial operations. However, the end of the last year came, the start of the new year brought us into the new regulations, which are these delegated and implemented regulations from EASA, from the European system, if you like. And therefore, commercial is really not recognised as a difference. It's all about risk. How much risk? What is the risk? based on the aircraft that you're flying. So commercially, it makes no difference what you need, other than we need to talk a little bit about insurance and insurance if you're flying commercially. So there is a question that comes up very shortly on that as well. As far as commercially, as far as the qualifications are concerned, then there's no differentiation. It's all about the risk. Okay. Sam asked a great question. What if I sell my services as a videographer? I'd like to offer drone footage as part of what he does. So what does Sam need to do for that? Okay, Sam, well, this is where we just need to be careful that everybody adheres to the regulations. If you are contracted, Sam, to use your drone and to take some footage as part of a verbal or written contract, then the one thing that you will need is commercial insurance for that aircraft, for your unmanned aircraft. Beyond that, it's no different as far as the regulations are concerned. So let's take an example. Let's say, Sam, you go down and you take a beautiful photo of your local cathedral and you put it online and you sell that. That's absolutely fine. You didn't need commercial insurance to be able to do that. However, if the cathedral asked you to take a beautiful photograph that was going to be sold online and they're going to pay you to do that, then that's when you must have that commercial insurance in place. Anything else to add to that? It covers it all.
There's other types of insurance as well. So you can get insurance for the recreational use, to cover you from crashing into a tree. So if it's just recreational, then you can get that for the year. And likewise, there's many apps and different sources for these. So you can just pay by the hour that you do it. So you could be in a field, suddenly realize that you need to do something and just get coverage very quickly.
Sure. Good question, Sam. Thanks for that. Michael, what's the situation with flying over people's house and property? Great question. Okay. Let's just go back to the same thing. If you've not done an A2 CFC or a GVC, you certainly can't fly over people's property. Okay, so just to be clear on that. If you then go on to do the A2 CFC, you'll have to stay 50 meters horizontally from uninvolved persons, and the protection of those uninvolved persons is the key to this. So if there is an uninvolved person in their back garden, then you would have to stay 50 meters away from that. However, if there's no uninvolved persons for you to be concerned about, then the property does not come into place. So it's about uninvolved persons. If you do the GVC, then you'll be able to fly within 50 meters, and that includes overflight of persons. Obviously, if you do the GVC course, we'll explain to you how we keep that overflight of persons to a minimum to keep people safe. That's the key thing. As far as the Mavic Mini 2 is concerned, that's that sub 250 gram aircraft. That's considered not to be pose a risk. Okay, so therefore, as far as the regulations say, there is nothing stopping you using a sub 250 gram aircraft to fly over person's property and over those uninvolved people as well. However, here's the catch. There is within the air navigation order an endangerment paragraph. Article 241, okay, and that says that if you recklessly or negligently cause or permit that unmanned aircraft to endanger a person or property, you commit an offence. I know that's a few words there together. However, there is, as far as the regulations say, nothing stopping you if you're using a sub 250 gram. However, there is that article within law that says if you've endangered somebody, you commit an offence.
It's all about keeping it safe, isn't it?
It's all about keeping it safe, absolutely.
And also about the governing rules of CCTV as well.
Yeah, so talking about privacy as well. So people who have a property don't own the airspace above that property. However, they're expected under that Information Commissioner's Office to have that right to privacy whilst they're in their own property and to be able to enjoy that. The likelihood is that you probably wouldn't commit an offence under the navigation order. However, there are other offences that could apply, such as harassment, stalking, and so on. So just be really careful on that one, because if you do fly over people's property and it becomes an issue to them and they feel harassed, alarmed, or distressed by that, then you may be looking at other offences under law that are outside of the regulations around unmanned aircraft. So just really bear that one in mind. Really, you could think of this as an action camera on a stick. Imagine the same principle if you were to put an action camera on a stick over someone's property, thinking about it like that. So maybe hopefully that helps you to think about it like that as well. Just while we're on that subject, if you're flying in a public area, then members of the public can't really object to you filming. It's in a public area. If they're in a private area, then you're going to find that there's more objections. So just be mindful of that. People still get a little bit upset. We need to protect the reputation of the unmanned aircraft industry as well. Just because you legally can do something doesn't necessarily mean you should as well. So just please bear that in mind. Kevin asks, what qualifications do you need to run a DJI Mini 2? Yeah.
Technically none.
Technically no qualifications to fly a DJI Mini 2, Kevin. They are a very good, very capable aircraft. So let's just talk about why you would fly something like this over something a bit more cinematic, such as the Mavic 2 Pro. And hopefully we can explain this to you. Technically, no qualifications. What I would say is you do need to put your operator ID on. So you need to get it still needs to be registered, and you still need to pay £9 and register that with your operator ID. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing is, even though you legally don't have to, you really should be encouraged to do that online 40 questions online test. And that will demonstrate that you at least understood the regulations. Because bear in mind, there are other things, like I've said, that could come to bite you down the line, such as some of the articles of the Air Navigation Order and so on. Appreciate this is complicated, and appreciate there are a lot of contradictions based on the aircraft type, and the aircraft weight. So, Kevin, I hope that answers your question. It's a very, very good aircraft for that, and it really depends on what you want to do. Bearing in mind, it's not waterproof, so you're going to have no IP rating with that aircraft. So, if you want to fly in rain or so on, then Pro, which has got a great Hasselblad low light camera on it, then you would consider that for that better cinematic videography. So you may be considering that.
I think the other thing to note as well is that your responsibility is to stay visual line of sight at all times, and at about 70 to 100 meters you can barely see this in the sky. And
Yeah.
you can take it out, keep your eyes on it, but it's very difficult to see where something is bigger. So
yeah, it's a good point. I think when you're going to be flying the Mini 2, generally speaking, you're going to want an observer with you, because you're going to be needing to look down at your screen just to line up your shot. And the minute you look down and look back, it's going to be extremely difficult to pick it up to where it was. Okay, so that's also going to cause a challenge. So really, the Mini 2, you're going to want your observer with you to keep an eye on the aircraft at all times. So it's really what works for you and the type of industry that you are either in or that you want to get into as well. Robert asks, what type of license do you need to fly?
Hello everyone, we're experiencing a few technical difficulties at the moment. It appears the signal has just dropped out. Obviously we will try and get them back shortly. If we're not back in 5 minutes, we will reschedule the rest of the talk. Once again, I apologise for the inconvenience, and we will try and be back up and running shortly. Thank you.
Okay, hopefully we are coming back online and we will share our screen with you.
I'm not sure.
Hopefully we are back online. Hopefully you can see.
Get the chat open as well.
Yeah.
Just double check. Sorry about this.
We are back. Okay, thank you for that. Apologies, don't know what happened there. We dropped off the internet connection. So line of sight, well, Robert, it's not going to be that easy. It's going to be additional qualifications. If you want to do it at the moment, you will need to apply for what is called an operational safety case. Therefore, it's really quite a complex process.
It's a lot of paperwork, three volumes of documents to submit, and it's expensive as well. So at the moment, it's definitely for the specialists as opposed to the common person.
Yeah.
So.
So if you've got a specific project in mind, Robert, but I think if you're a hobbyist, then it's probably not going to be reasonable. It's a very expensive process as well. The fees to apply for an operational safety case are very expensive.
£1,900.
Yeah, and then an annual fee as well.
Yeah.
But if you do go down that general visual line of sight certificate route, what we expect and anticipate is that predefined risk assessments will give you some extensions as the market matures. So hopefully you'll find some benefits.
Yeah, these aircraft are very capable. You know, they can go out to sort of 6 miles without any issues. But yeah, at the moment the regulations aren't there to enable that.
Yeah. Okay. Gail, she asked a good question. Do you think it's worth buying a cheaper drone to practice before taking that A2 CofC? It's a good question.
Yeah.
How cheap can you get an aircraft? There is a saying, isn't there? You buy cheap, you buy twice. But certainly, it depends what your budget is, and if realistically you don't want to invest £400 or pounds or more, what you will find though is there's lots of protection built into these aircraft that they're going to assist you. The key one being GPS. Yeah. So GPS is really going to stop that aircraft flying away in the wind. So if you go out and buy something for £30 or £50, the likelihood is that the minute you take it outside, it's just going to blow off with the wind and you'll not see it again. So we need to be quite mindful of that one. It would potentially give you something for later on to as a backup and to fly as well, but it really depends. I suppose for me personally, I would want to buy the aircraft the best that I could afford based on my business model and business plan. So but that is only a personal view.
It does really depend, because if you've got something big like an Inspire, you know, you don't want to be flying, looking that around all the time to get your currency hours in. Whereas, you know, like a Mini 2 would be perfect for that. So, and the running costs for Mini 2 would be a lot less, and the risk is a lot less. So, there's no simple answer, I don't think.
Yeah, I agree. Adrian, this is a really good question. If I buy a Mavic Pro, so what Adrian's talking about is buying one of these, a Mavic Pro. Yeah, you're quite right, Adrian. It does weigh 900 grams. It's just under a kilo. It's got a camera. You're going to buy a commercial insurance, as you're quite right. You want to stay 50 meters away from uninvolved people. Well, okay, that's right. You will stay 50 meters away from uninvolved people. Why should you do the A2 CofC? Well, because you can only fly in that A3 category with this aircraft. So you must actually stay that 150 meters away from that congested area. So therefore, you're not really going to, unless you're going to stay outside those congested areas, and you've not mentioned the congested areas in there, you're going to be very limited. You're going to be in the middle of a field, keeping 50 meters away from people, not flying at the beach, at the park. Bear in mind, a park is a recreational area, right. And that's one of those areas that come into play as well. So you can't fly at the beach, you can't fly at the park. If you've got a great big field, you can go fly in that belongs to somebody that you're happy and you've got permission to use it, and that's all you want to do. But I would think that you very quickly wanting to be doing a lot more. So you need to do your A2 CofC or your GVC. If you do your A2 CofC, that's that 50 meters horizontally away from those uninvolved people with no direct overflight. If you do a GVC, still keep your 50 meters, but it acts as a bubble, and you can have that direct overflight of with that GVC qualification, because the A2 CFC is more the entry level, and that GVC is a more complicated, more one that gives you more experience, and therefore the risks that you are allowed to take, albeit them risk assessed, are that little bit higher. You've got that autonomy to make that decision for yourself to take that higher risk.
Yeah, but it just depends what commercial work you're doing, really. I think if you're just doing sunsets in the middle of a field, then you don't need it. But if you're near places, then you're going to need extra certificate. Yeah.
And we talk about uninvolved people, and that's uninvolved people who are not there for that flight. So Adrian, I hope that answers your question. If not, feel free to give us a bit more info on that one. I think you've got some ideas there. So we will go to the floor, talking open to some questions there. We've got some dates lined up that we're offering. We're doing a reduced price as well for our ex-clients. So that A2 CFC, we've got Friday the 30th of July, Saturday the 31st of July, and for the A2 CFC as well, along with Monday 9th of August. You can get booked on those. You can do those remotely, so that's easy to do. It's less than a day, and there's no flying element to that. And if you want to do that combined, where you do the A2 CFC and the GVC, it's £595. Our next one is on the 11th and 12th of August. If you wanted to do that, that would be 2 days in the classroom, and that's in Lincoln, and that is followed by a practical flight test. So if there are any questions, I'm quite happy to take those questions going forward. Hopefully we've covered the questions off about there was a couple of others. Hopefully some of the questions are very similar. There was a question about flying at night. It really makes no difference. You've just got to be mindful that you can keep line of sight of the aircraft, and that you've just got to be sure that you're not going to crash into anything. So there's no differentiation really about flying at night as far as the aircraft and the regulations are concerned, but you must be careful when you're transiting not to hit something. The risk flying at night is obviously much higher.
If you want to stop the share on that as well. And then I suppose it's worth talking about the FPV side of things.
Of course, yeah.
So if you do go down the FPV route, which is it's a great bit of kit, and it's very fast and very makes a lot of fun, nauseating, then you need a visual observer, because your responsibility is still to remain within visual line of sight. So you need someone to help you with that collision avoidance. But they are good fun.
Good stuff.
So apart from the minor connection issues.
So I'm just waiting to see if we've got any more questions to come through that we can answer for you now. I do appreciate that the regulations are complex. Certainly, there is a document that would definitely recommend CAP 2012. Yeah. That document is very much worth the look, and will explain to you which aircraft you can and can't fly. Just a couple of other bits of information. There is a question coming in. I'll have a look at that. Just a couple of other bits of information. The maximum weight you'll be able to fly, weight of aircraft you'll be able to fly with that A2 CFC is 4 kilos for your C-rated aircraft when one becomes available. Therefore, if you want to fly anything bigger, or you want to fly something with different sensors, maybe you've got some kind of specialist work you want to do using thermal imaging cameras, ground penetrating radars, that kind of thing, then really you really want to be looking at the GVC, in my opinion. With the GVC, it's a combination course, so you get the GVC and the A2 CFC as well. So you get both. So it gives you the ability to go out and use the simple open category stuff with the A2, or to use that GVC where you will have to do some work in as far as risk assessments are concerned and so on. Okay, so actually kind of good question there. I've got an A2 CFC. What are the advantages of a GVC? Okay, so with your A2 CFC, you're going to have to remain 50 meters away from horizontally with no direct overflight of uninvolved people. If you do a GVC, then you'll be able to use that as a bubble, and therefore you will be able to overfly those people should you need to, and keep it to a minimum, but you will be able to overfly those people. You'll also, as I've just mentioned, be able to fly aircraft that are bigger than 4 kilos as well, and that's because the open category allows you to fly up to 25 kilos in those open areas in that A3, but when you get into the A2 subcategory, then the maximum limit is 4 kilos. So therefore, and that's with a C-rated aircraft. So therefore, you would, if you did a GVC, converted to a GVC, yes, it'd give you that overflight as an addition. It'd give you the ability to fly something heavier than 4 kilos down the line, should you want to.
I think it's also worth noting the future capability it's going to open up as well. At the moment, we're fairly restricted on PDRA 01 and 02. As we go forward and the regulations change, the GVC will enable you to unlock further modules, which will then give you the beyond visual line of sight or the extended visual line of sight, and other things which are potentially coming. So it will hopefully unlock a lot more as we go forward.
Yeah. Okay, so just give it another minute to see if there's any more questions, and then if there are no more questions, then we'll look to wrap up. So I hope that was useful. I do appreciate there are some contradictions when it comes to the regulations. It is very complex, we recognise that, and that's really why we would certainly advocate you do the training. So I hope that's been able to answer your questions today. Peter, thanks for joining. Peter was a last minute. Peter was a last minute stand-in.
So the person that was supposed to be here has been called home because their glass bubbles.
The glass bubbles burst. So welcome to that.
Okay.
So thank you very much, everybody. There are no more questions, so hopefully that was good. And whatever you do, just enjoy it. And you know, you don't have to make money out of drones to enjoy it. It's a great hobby. Personally, for me, it's a hobby. I love flying drones, and I've got different aircraft that fly in different scenarios, and just really get a lot of pleasure out of being able to go out and film some things that you just don't see. It's a different angle. You see them from another dimension, and I've found things that I never even knew existed. So yeah, but if it's whether it's about making money from it for you, it is a massive growing sector, and it's continuing to grow. It's certainly one of the biggest growth sectors going. It's worth a lot of money to UK industry and beyond, and there's some great opportunities out there within flying unmanned aircraft. So thank you very much. I hope that at least helped to answer some of the questions.
If you do have further questions, then please get in contact and we can answer and help you through.
Yeah. So thank you.